There is something about sitting with a mystery you know might never be answered that feels oddly peaceful, not the anxious kind of not knowing, where you need the answer right now or you cannot move on. The other kind. The kind where the question itself becomes something you can carry around, something that keeps a story warm in your mind long after the screen goes dark. Rick and Morty is a show that is extraordinarily good at creating that feeling. It throws you into dimensions you did not know existed, introduces characters who feel like they have entire histories behind their eyes, and then trusts you enough to leave some of those histories permanently in shadow. Not because the writers forgot, not because they ran out of time, but because they understand something that most storytellers spend years trying to learn. Sometimes the best version of a thing is the one that lives in the space between what you see and what you imagine. Sometimes the question is more valuable than the answer. This video is not going to pretend to solve everything. If you came here looking for definitive answers wrapped up neatly, you are going to need to get comfortable with a different kind of satisfaction. What this is instead is a long, slow walk through every major mystery this show has planted over its 9 seasons and counting. We are going to sit with each one, turn it over, look at what the show actually tells us, what it deliberately withholds, and what the fan communities and the show's own creators have said about the gaps. And then we are going to let each mystery breathe and move on to the next one. So, if you have headphones in, if the lights are low, if you are settling in for the night, that is exactly the energy this was made for. Let it wash over you. You do not need to take notes. You do not need to solve anything. Just listen, and let the universe of Rick and Morty unfold the way it was always meant to. Quietly, incompletely, and somehow perfectly. Section 1. The Fabricated Memory. What Rick's backstory actually means. Let us start at the very beginning of Rick Sanchez, which is also one of the most deliberately confusing places the show ever takes you. The first time we get anything resembling Rick's origin story is in the Season 3 premiere, an episode called The Rick Shank Rickdemption. Rick is being held inside a Federation prison. An agent named Cornelius Daniel has hacked into Rick's mind using a device that allows him to walk through memories, trying to locate the moment Rick first invented the portal gun. And Rick takes him into a memory. A warm one. A backyard on a sunny day. Rick is younger, sitting outside. And there is a woman. She is blonde and bright-eyed. There is a baby daughter with her. The moment is tender in a way Rick almost never allows himself to be in the present timeline. And then, a portal opens in the sky. A different Rick steps through. He tries to convince the young Rick to take the portal gun he is offering. The young Rick says no. He has a family. He does not want it. The portal closes. Hours later, a bomb drops from that same place in the sky. It destroys the backyard, the house, the woman, the little girl, and the young Rick is left standing in the rubble of the life he chose over the multiverse. That grief, the show implies, is what sent him into the universe. That grief is what made him spend years hunting down the Rick who was responsible. That grief is what made Rick Sanchez into Rick Sanchez. And then he turns to the agent and says it himself. He calls it a totally fabricated origin story. For a lot of viewers, especially newer ones, that moment lands as a punchline. Rick invented this elaborate emotional backstory to distract the agent, uploaded a virus while the guy was lost in the emotion of it, and escaped. Clever, dark, quintessential Rick. Case closed. Except it is not closed. Because the show immediately starts dropping evidence that the story was not fabricated at all. In Season 5, a character named Mr. Nimbus shows up. He is an old rival and clearly someone who has genuine history with Rick. And he mentions Diane, the woman from the memory, by name. Rick's reaction is not casual. It is not the reaction of a man being asked about a made-up person. He snaps. He tells Mr. Nimbus not to establish canonical backstory with him, and the line is delivered with a kind of raw edge that does not read as comedy. It reads as a man who has been keeping a lid on something for a very long time and does not want anyone lifting it. By the end of Season 5, the show has confirmed it. The origin story was real. Diane Sanchez was real. Rick's original daughter Beth was real. And Rick Prime, the version of Rick who dropped that bomb, was real. Everything Rick described in that so-called fabricated memory actually happened. The only part that was invented was how Rick eventually discovered portal travel. He told the agent he had a eureka moment after the loss, that his grief somehow unlocked the secret of portal fluid. That part was the lie, the technical lie, the one that let him upload the virus. But Diane? Real. The bomb? Real. The grief? The most real thing Rick Sanchez has ever carried. So the question that lingers, the one that the show spent 2 full seasons allowing fans to sit with before finally addressing it, is not just what happened. It is why Rick chose to clothe the truth in fiction. Why dress a true memory as a fake one? Why let your audience, both in-show and watching at home, believe for years that this devastating backstory was a manipulation tactic? The answer the show offers is quietly devastating. Rick was not hiding the story from the Federation agent. He was hiding it from himself. The thing about calling something a fabrication is that it gives you distance. It lets you use the memory without owning it. It lets you be the guy who invented a clever story instead of the guy who lost everything. For a man who has spent decades building an identity around being the smartest, most capable, most untouchable person in the universe, admitting that a bomb dropped from the sky and took away the 2 things he loved most is not something he can do cleanly. So he calls it fiction, even when it is not, even when every detail of it is sitting right there in the wreckage of Dimension C-137, a dimension we later learn Rick kept locked in a permanent time loop, the same day repeating forever, the day he lost Diane and Beth playing on a silent loop while he lived out his life in another family's house, in another dimension, waiting. There is another layer to this that does not get discussed enough. When Rick Prime visited young Rick in that memory, he did not just offer a portal gun. He made a case. He told Rick that a man with his intelligence had an obligation to the multiverse. That being a husband and a father in one dimension was a waste of what Rick could be. He essentially argued that Rick's love for Diane and Beth was holding him back from his true purpose, and Rick said no. That no is the most important thing Rick Sanchez has ever done, and it cost him everything. Because Rick Prime, the Rick who made that offer and heard that refusal, came back later and dropped the bomb. Not as an accident, not as collateral damage, deliberately. As if to say, if you will not choose the multiverse, then the multiverse will take your reason not to. The question fans spent years asking was whether the backstory was real. But the deeper question, the one that does not go away even after the show confirms the truth, is whether Rick's no changed anything. If he had said yes, if he had taken the portal gun and left Diane and Beth for a life of interdimensional adventure, would they still be alive? Would the bomb never have come? Did Rick Prime target them precisely because Rick refused? And if the answer to that is yes, then Rick's love for his family was not just the thing he lost, it was also the reason he lost it. He could have abandoned them, and they would have survived. He chose to stay, and they died because of it. That is the kind of irony that does not need to be spelled out loudly. The show just lets it sit there, quiet, waiting. And there is one final piece to this that arrived in a later season and changed the shape of the whole thing in ways that are still being processed. Rick Prime, at some point after killing Diane and Beth C-137, used something called the Omega device to erase Diane across the entire multiverse. Not just one version of her, every version. The Omega device works by killing one copy of a person and using that death to propagate across every parallel version of them, eliminating them from existence wholesale. Rick Prime did this to Diane, and in doing so, he made it permanently impossible for Rick to find her in another dimension. He closed every door. He burned every copy. This is why we have never seen a Diane variant in the show, not because the writers forgot to include her, because she was deliberately erased from the multiverse by the man who also killed the original. The absence that seemed like a storytelling gap was actually a storytelling choice of enormous precision. And the haunting thing is that Rick built an AI version of Diane and kept it in the house in Dimension C-137, a simulation of her voice, calling to him from the other room. Not a clone, not a copy, just a sound. Just enough to keep the wound from closing. When he finally returns to that dimension and tells the AI it is time to move on, that he has found a new family, the scene is one of the quietest moments of grief the show has ever offered. He is not talking to a person. He knows that. He is talking to a piece of code that sounds like something he lost. And saying goodbye to it anyway is the closest Rick has ever come to healing. The creators have said publicly that they never intended to fully resolve Rick's backstory, that they worried too much explanation would diminish the mystery of who he is. And that instinct is understandable. But what they ended up doing instead is something arguably more interesting. They confirmed enough to make the grief real, and left enough unspoken that the shape of it keeps shifting depending on how long you sit with it. We know what happened. We do not fully know what it cost him. And we probably never will. Drop a comment right now telling me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. I genuinely love seeing where these videos reach, and if you have not subscribed yet, please do. It takes 1 second, and it means everything for getting this kind of long-form content out to more people. Section 2. Who is Morty C-137? Really? The Dimension Identity Crisis? Most people who watch Rick and Morty casually assume they are following one Rick and one Morty throughout the entire series. That they are the original, the C-137 pair, the real deal from the start. The show encourages this assumption for the first several seasons, and then, with almost no fanfare, it reveals that the assumption was never quite right. Here is what we know, laid out as carefully as possible. Rick Sanchez is from Dimension C-137. That is confirmed. His original dimension is the one where Diane and Beth died, where there is no Morty because Morty's parents never met, never married, never had children. When Rick Prime dropped that bomb and took everything from Rick, Rick was left in a dimension with no family to anchor him. The Morty we follow throughout the show is not from that dimension. He could not be. That Morty does not exist. So the Rick who shows up in the show's timeline, the one who moves into the Smith house and takes Morty on adventures, is C-137 Rick, living in a dimension that is not his own. He settled into the home of a different Beth, a different Morty, a different Jerry, a different Summer. He moved in with a family that was never originally his, and over time, because of who Rick is and what he does to the people around him, it became his family anyway. The Morty from the Prime Dimension, the one the show actually follows for the first season or so of its run, is therefore not Morty C-137 in any technical sense. He is Morty Prime, from the original dimension the show was set in before the events of the episode Rick Potion number 9, where Rick's love potion goes catastrophically wrong and transforms most of the Earth's population into monstrous, mutated creatures. After ruining that world beyond repair, Rick and Morty flee through a portal to another dimension where the other versions of themselves have just died in an unrelated accident. They bury those versions in the backyard. They take over their lives. And the show continues. Which means the Beth, Jerry, and Summer who appear in most of the show from Season 1 onward are not the original Beth, Jerry, and Summer. They are the replacements. The ones from the dimension Rick and Morty moved into, and Morty himself is now living in a dimension that is not his original home. This layering of identity and displacement is something the show plays with very deliberately. Season 6 opens with Rick explicitly telling Morty that he is not C-137 Morty. That label belongs to Rick. Morty never technically had it, and yet throughout the Citadel's history, Morty is referred to as C-137 Morty by other Ricks and Mortys, as if the designation has transferred to him by association, by proximity to Rick, by the sheer weight of adventure they have shared. What this means narratively is strange and beautiful and a little unsettling. The Morty we love, the one we have followed through 9 seasons of increasingly dangerous adventures, does not have a clean origin story. He is from the Prime Dimension. He is living in someone else's dimension. He has taken over a dead version of his own life. He carries memories of a home that is now a ruin of Cronenberged monsters. And he has never once been told that the dimension he calls home is not technically his. The question this raises is one the show has leaned into without fully answering. Who is this Morty, really? Is identity determined by the dimension you come from, or the life you live? If Morty has grown up, made memories, formed bonds, and become who he is inside this replacement life, does it matter that it was built on borrowed foundations? The show seems to argue that it does not matter, or at least, that it should not. But there is a subtle thread running through Morty's character arc that suggests he feels the displacement in ways he cannot name. There is something rootless about him that goes beyond anxiety. A sense that even in the moments when his life feels most real, there is a version of it that was lived by someone else who looked just like him and is now buried in a backyard. Fan theories about this aspect of the show are extensive and often ingenious. One of the most persistent is the idea that the distance between who Morty currently is and who evil Morty is could be bridged by these layers of identity displacement. The argument goes that a Morty who knows he has no real home, who has been stripped of his original dimension, who has watched his own dead body get buried, who has grown up being dragged through trauma after trauma, is a Morty who might eventually decide that the only rational response is to stop being anyone's sidekick and become the author of his own story. Evil Morty, as we understand him, is a Morty who reached that conclusion. The show has never confirmed whether Evil Morty is from the Prime Dimension or some other dimension entirely. It has never told us how long it took him to become what he is. It has never shown us the specific breaking point. But the show has confirmed that Evil Morty was once like any other Morty, that he was once scared and soft and uncertain, and that something pushed him past the edge. The question of whether our Morty, the one we follow, is walking down a path that eventually leads to that edge is one the show has been careful not to answer. In later seasons, as Morty grows more capable and less visibly afraid, the show frames this development as damage rather than growth, which is a fascinating choice. Every time Morty seems to be becoming more competent, more decisive, less hesitant, the narrative makes sure we understand that the cost of that development is some piece of his original self. He erases memories with the memory device. He buries trauma under layers of experience until it becomes scar tissue rather than wound. He handles alien weapons with increasing ease. And every time he does, something that made him distinctly Morty, the anxious, caring, deeply human core of him, diminishes slightly. There is also the unresolved question of what Morty's life would look like if Rick had never entered it. The show established that in the Prime Dimension, Rick did not show up until Morty was already in his early teens. The years between Rick's entry into the Smith family and the beginning of the show are murky. We do not know what kind of child Morty was before Rick. We do not know if the anxiety was always there or if it developed in response to the adventures. We do not know if the Morty Prime who was buried in a backyard would have turned out differently if that Rick had never come back. What we are left with is a character who exists at the intersection of at least 3 different timelines, 3 different homes, 3 different versions of himself, and none of them are fully his. He is C-137 Morty by association. He is Morty Prime by birth. He is replacement Morty by circumstance. And who that makes him on the deepest level, the show has been careful to keep just out of reach. That is not a gap in the storytelling. It is the point. A boy who does not know exactly where he comes from or exactly where he is going is infinitely more interesting than one with a clean address. Section 3. Mr. Poopy Butthole. The most suspicious friend the show ever made. There is a small yellow creature with a top hat who has been appearing in this show since Season 2. And after 9 seasons, the most accurate thing you can say about him is that nobody knows what he is. Not really. The episode that introduced Mr. Poopy Butthole is called Total Recall, and it is one of the show's most elegant pieces of construction. The premise is that alien parasites have infected the Smith household. These parasites are psychic memory plants. They implant themselves into the minds of everyone in the house and create false memories of their existence, making the family believe they have always known these new characters, that they have history with them, that they are friends, family, colleagues. The creatures take physical form and walk around the house, and the family has to figure out which ones are real and which ones are parasites. The key insight Morty arrives at is this: the parasites can only implant positive memories. They cannot create bad ones. So, the rule becomes simple. If you cannot think of a single negative memory involving someone, they are probably a parasite. If you have at least one bad memory of someone, they are real. The show populates the house with dozens of wild, funny, increasingly bizarre parasite characters. And one of them, introduced at the very start, is Mr. Poopy Butthole. He is warm. He is kind. He has a cheerful, musical way of speaking. He calls people by affectionate names. He seems to have been part of this family forever, and the family cannot think of a single bad memory involving him. Beth draws the obvious conclusion. She picks up a gun and shoots him, and then the show does the cruelest, most beautiful thing. He bleeds. He screams. He is taken away in an ambulance, genuinely wounded, genuinely suffering. He was real. Beth shot a real person based on the logic of the episode, and the episode does not let her off the hook for it. The closing post-credit sequence is him in a hospital bed, beginning the long process of learning to walk again. So, he is real. But what is he? Dan Harmon, the show's co-creator, offered a theory in an 9944, an interview that is genuinely one of the most interesting pieces of lore building the show has ever done, even though it was offered casually, almost as an aside. His theory is that Mr. Poopy Butthole is not a parasite but something adjacent to one, a different species. He described the character as a fourth-dimensional phantom, a being not bound by conventional space who appears in concentrations of temporal malfunction and memory breakdown. He compared it to the relationship between flies and spiders. Wherever the memory parasites bloom, Mr. Poopy Butthole's species shows up. They are more benign, more advanced. They exploit the same memory holes that the parasites use, burrowing into gaps and gaps, making themselves feel familiar without being dangerous. This theory would explain how Mr. Poopy Butthole could exist genuinely in the family's life, be a real presence with real history, and yet be the kind of presence that leaves only warmth and comfort behind. It would explain why he seems immune to the mechanics of the parasite episode. He is not one of them. He is something that exists in the same ecosystem they do but operates by different rules. It would also, if you follow Harmon's logic to its natural conclusion, mean that Mr. Poopy Butthole's entire relationship with the Smith family is predicated on a kind of gentle, benign invasion of their memory, that they did not choose to know him. He chose to be known by them. That the warmth of their history together is real in a functional sense but manufactured in an origin sense. This is deeply strange, and the show has never confirmed it officially. Because here is the thing about Mr. Poopy Butthole that gets even more unusual the more seasons go on. He ages, he changes, he develops storylines that are independent of Rick and Morty's adventures. He gets married, has a son, goes through a divorce, struggles with addiction, rebuilds his life. He appears in post-credit scenes across multiple seasons, showing us the passage of time in his personal life in a way that parallels, strangely, the viewer's own experience of watching the show. He grows older while we watch. He becomes more tired, more lived in, more real. And throughout all of it, there is not a single reference to him in any of the show's flashback sequences. When Rick travels through Birdperson's memories in Season 5, we see young Rick, we see Birdperson, we see Squanchy, but no mention of Mr. Poopy Butthole. When Memory Rick exists as a preserved version of Rick's younger consciousness, he also has no awareness of the character. For someone who seems to have been a long-standing family friend, his absence from every historical account of the family's life is notable. Season 9 is apparently building toward a deeper exploration of his origins. The final episode of Season 8 reportedly began seeding questions about his nature, with other characters starting to look at him with new suspicion. Whether the show will actually answer what Mr. Poopy Butthole is, or whether it will do what it has always done and offer a theory that raises more questions than it settles, remains to be seen. What we do know is this: he is one of the show's most quietly radical choices. A character who exists to ask you whether genuine warmth and real history are enough to define a relationship, even if the mechanism by which that history came to exist is artificial. A character who is shot for being too nice, too positive, too consistently good, in a universe that has decided that much goodness is probably fake. And the show's answer, delivered in blood and an ambulance, is that sometimes the warmth is real. Sometimes the most suspicious thing in the room is genuine. Sometimes kindness is not a con. Even if we still do not know exactly what he is. Even if we probably never will. Section 4. Beth or Space Beth. Which one is the clone? This mystery has the unique quality of being officially unresolvable by design. The show did not leave it open because the writers could not decide. It left it open because Rick actively destroyed the ability to answer it. Let us trace the path to how we got here. In the Season 3 episode called The ABCs of Beth, Rick offers his daughter a choice. He explains that he has the technology to create a perfect clone of her, one that would stay behind and live her life, care for her kids, maintain her marriage, while the real Beth goes out into the universe and has whatever adventure she wants. He frames it as a gift. He is giving her what he was never given: the freedom to leave without consequence. Beth spends the episode wrestling with the offer. She comes to Rick and tells him to decide for her whether she stays or goes, whether he wants her in his life. It is one of the rawest, most emotionally honest things she ever does. She is asking her father to choose her, just once, without her having to earn it. Rick cannot do it. He cannot make the choice out loud. And so, he does what Rick always does when a decision becomes too emotionally weighted. He invents his way around it. He creates the clone. He puts both Beths in sleep pods. He deliberately mixes up which pod is which, removes the labels, and then erases his own memory of which Beth is which, so that even he cannot tell the difference. This is important. Rick did not simply choose not to tell anyone the answer. He surgically removed his own ability to access it. He made the mystery permanent on purpose. By the time Season 4's finale brings Space Beth back to Earth, There are two Beths standing in the same room. One has been living the life of wife and mother and horse surgeon. The other has been fighting alien rebels across the galaxy. Both have implants in their necks that Rick installed as a failsafe. Both react to learning about the implants with the same fury. And when Rick is cornered and asked which one is real, he cannot tell them. Not because he is hiding it, because he genuinely does not know. He shows them the recording he made before erasing the memory. The footage of him creating the clone, shuffling the pods, removing the labels. The recording ends before the answer is revealed. He did not record the answer. He made sure there was no record of it. The show's writers, speaking in interviews, have confirmed that even they do not have a definitive answer. The mystery is structural, not accidental. The entire point is that the question of which Beth is real is the wrong question. The show is asking something more disorienting. What does it mean to be real if your memories, your relationships, your love, and your pain are all identical? If both Beths love the same children, grieve the same losses, and carry the same complicated feelings about Rick, does the biological origin of either one change anything meaningful about who they are? The show's answer seems to be no, and it demonstrates this by having both Beths simply continue existing, accepting the uncertainty, building a relationship with each other that is strange and competitive, and tender in equal measure. But fans have not been content to let the question go, and the deep dive analysis community has assembled a fairly compelling case that the Beth who stayed with the family is the clone, and Space Beth is the real one. The reasoning is built on behavioral analysis across the seasons. The Beth from seasons 1 through 3, before the clone choice, has a certain quality to her interactions with Rick, a kind of desperate, grasping need for his approval that feels foundational to who she is. The Beth who returned from space seems, paradoxically, slightly less focused on his validation, as if she has built enough of an independent self during her adventures that her need for Rick is no longer the engine running everything. The argument is that a clone created to serve a function, to maintain Rick's presence in the family, would be more oriented toward Rick by design. The real Beth, who went out and lived her own life, would have developed something beyond the wound. This theory is unconfirmed. The show's writers have acknowledged it and have not contradicted it directly. They have said the mystery is intended to remain open, which means one of two things is true. Either the show is saving the revelation for a future season of enormous narrative weight, or the revelation is simply never coming. And what the show is teaching us is how to be okay with that. Living with the mystery is the lesson. Living with both Beths, neither more real than the other, is the life Rick gave his daughter. And probably the kindest thing he has ever done, even if it does not look like kindness from the outside. Section 5. Evil Morty after the curve. Where did he go and what does he want? The moment Evil Morty breaks through the Central Finite Curve is one of the great single shots of the entire series. He is in a small ship. Around him, the Citadel is disintegrating, Rick's and Morty's dying in the collapse he engineered. He does not look back. He does not celebrate. He flies through the gap he punched in the barrier between the controlled section of the multiverse and the infinite uncharted space beyond it, and then he is gone. It is the most complete exit any character in this show has ever made. And then the show kept going. And Evil Morty kept showing up. This is where things get complicated. Because the Evil Morty who appears after the curve is different from the one before it. In Season 7, when Rick is finally on the hunt for Rick Prime and accidentally crosses Evil Morty's path, we see a version of the character who has settled into something like peace. He found a dimension outside the curve where the conditions of his new life seem pleasant. He was not scheming. He was not building toward another grand manipulation. He seemed, for the first time in his entire arc, to be resting. Then Rick interrupts it. And Evil Morty, because he is still Evil Morty, and because his hatred for Rick's runs bone deep, agrees to help bring down Rick Prime, a figure who represents the ultimate expression of everything Evil Morty spent his entire life fighting against. He helps Rick find him. He helps Rick kill him. And then, critically, he takes the plans for the Omega device, the weapon Rick Prime used to erase Diane from the multiverse, and he leaves again. Before going, he warns Rick that if Rick comes looking for him again, he will use the Omega device to end what he calls the Rick experiment. This is an enormous unresolved threat. The Omega device, in the right hands, or in this case the hands of the smartest and most motivated Morty who has ever existed, could theoretically be used to erase Rick entirely. Not one version of Rick. Every version. The same way Diane was erased. The question of what evil Morty intends to do with that weapon, and whether he plans to use it or is simply holding it as insurance, is one the show is currently sitting with. By season 9, evil Morty has returned again, and the shape of his character has shifted in ways that are genuinely surprising. He is not simply an antagonist anymore. He is something stranger. In the episode informally called There's Something About Morty, his primary motivation seems to be taunting our Morty about his relationship with Rick. He makes our Morty feel insecure about how much time Rick has been spending with evil Morty. He is, in a deeply unsettling way, almost enjoying it. Almost playful. This is not the cold, calculating political operator who manipulated an entire civilization. This is someone who has gotten what he wanted, left behind the system that trapped him, and is now apparently filling his time by poking at the version of himself who stayed behind. Which raises a question that is far more human than anything evil Morty has ever made us ask about him before. Is he lonely? There is a reading of evil Morty's behavior in the most recent seasons that is genuinely heartbreaking if you let yourself sit with it. He escaped. He got out. He went somewhere beyond the curve, somewhere without Rick's, and he should be free. But he keeps coming back, not to threaten, not to scheme, just to exist near the only other beings in the universe who understand what he is. He hates Rick's. He resents what Rick's have done to Mortis across infinite dimensions. He built his entire identity around the refusal to be defined by his relationship to Rick, and yet here he is, season after season, orbiting the very relationship he claimed to have left behind. The show has not explained this. It has not told us whether evil Morty's returns are strategic, habitual, or something he cannot fully understand himself. It has not told us what he does between appearances. It has not shown us what the world outside the curve looks like to him, whether it lives up to what he imagined, whether the freedom he fought for feels like freedom once you have it. And the question of the Omega device hangs over all of it. He has the plans, possibly the capability to build it, and a stated willingness to use it if Rick pushes too far. The show is holding that tension carefully. Every time evil Morty appears and chooses not to use it, the question of why gets heavier. One theory that has been gathering momentum in fan communities is that evil Morty does not want to use the Omega device because using it would make him into Rick Prime. Rick Prime erased Diane to hurt Rick. Using the Omega device to erase Rick would not be liberation. It would be revenge. And there is a version of evil Morty who understands the difference, who understands that becoming the thing you hate is the worst possible outcome, and is holding himself back from that edge by not pulling the trigger. If that reading is correct, then evil Morty's restraint is not strategic, it is moral. Which would make him the most morally complex character in the show's history. A being who could destroy Rick at any moment and chooses not to, not because he does not want to, but because he knows what that choice would cost him about who he is. He escaped the cage. The only thing left is choosing not to build another one. Section 6. The Birdperson Phoenix Person Saga, and the questions that linger. Let us talk about the friend. Rick Sanchez does not have many real friends. He has people he uses and people he tolerates and people he keeps at arm's length. But Birdperson, the tall, feathered, deeply principled warrior from Rick's past, is something different. He is the friend Rick actually kept. The one who was there before the adventures made Rick into the version of himself he wears like armor. The one who fought alongside him against the Galactic Federation during a period of Rick's life we see only in glimpses and memories. Birdperson appears in the show for the first time at a party Rick throws at the Smith household. He is quieter than you might expect for a man with Rick's history of chaos. He speaks in a measured way. He dispenses wisdom when asked and stays silent when he is not. He is the kind of person who has seen enough of the universe to know what matters and what does not. He falls in love with Tammy, a high school student and a friend of Summer's who had been embedded in the Smith family social circle for a while. The show presents their relationship as genuine from Birdperson's side. He is not performing. He is not strategic. He loves her. She is an undercover Federation agent. The entire relationship was a mission. Their wedding, which Rick throws and which the whole extended group attends, is a trap. The Federation arrives mid-ceremony. Tammy shoots Birdperson multiple times, and the show, which had given us no warning this was coming, watches him fall. For a long time, we are supposed to believe he is dead. Then the post-credits scene of the Season 3 premiere reveals that the Federation retrieved his body and rebuilt it. They grafted cybernetics onto what remained of him. They gave him new wings, new armor, new programming. They named him Phoenix Person, And they activated him, and he flew away with Tammy, and the question of what was left of Birdperson inside that rebuilt shell became one of the show's most painful open threads. The answer came slowly and in pieces. Phoenix Person, under Federation control, is entirely different from the Birdperson we knew. He fights Rick in the Season 4 finale with no recognition, no hesitation, no access to whatever was left of their friendship. He is loyal only to the Federation's programming. When Rick tells him he killed Tammy, Phoenix Person's response is rage, not grief. It is the rage of a weapon told its user has been destroyed. It takes until Season 5 for Rick to finally bring Birdperson back. Not his body. That was already recovered, disassembled, and stored in the garage. To bring him back, Rick has to enter Birdperson's preserved consciousness, his mind stored like an archive, and find the part of him that still wants to live. He discovers that Birdperson, inside his own fractured memory palace, had essentially surrendered. He had decided that existing was not worth the effort of continuing, that everything he cared about had been destroyed or corrupted. He was sitting in his own mind waiting to stop. Rick, and this is one of the most genuinely moving things Rick Sanchez has ever done, refuses to let him stay there. He argues with him. He shows him what they fought for. He does not use logic or manipulation. He just stays until Birdperson comes back. And Birdperson does come back. But the mystery that the show left unresolved after this reunion is significant. Birdperson returns to himself, but he is not the same as before. He discovers he has a daughter, a child born of his relationship with Tammy that he had no knowledge of. The daughter has been held by the Galactic Federation. He goes to find her. And for a while the show focuses on this new phase of his life. Fatherhood, recovery, identity after trauma. What the show has never quite resolved is the question of what Birdperson thinks of Rick now. He told Rick, during their confrontation as Phoenix Person, that Rick was always a bad friend. That Birdperson's big day was not the wedding, but the Battle of Blood Ridge, and Rick knew that and still made the wedding such a focus. That Rick's self-centeredness, even in moments of genuine love and loyalty, leaves damage in its wake. After the restoration, after the reunion, Birdperson and Rick seem to be on better terms, but the show has not given us a real accounting of those words. It has not shown us a conversation between them about what the Phoenix Person years cost Birdperson, what Tammy's betrayal meant to him, what Rick's involvement in all of it, his enemies, his history, his life, did to someone who trusted him completely. Birdperson gave Rick his full loyalty, and that loyalty got him shot at his own wedding, rebuilt as a weapon, and lost inside his own mind. Does he regret it? Does he still believe in Rick? What does friendship look like between these two now that so much has been lost and so much has been rebuilt? The show has given us warmth between them without answering these questions. It has shown us that they are still in each other's lives. But the conversations that would make us fully understand the state of that friendship have happened off-screen, in the gaps between episodes, in the unnarrated years of Rick and Morty's timeline. Which is, of course, exactly where this show keeps its most important truths. Section 7. The Diane AI, the Omega device, and what it means to erase a person. The Omega device is one of the most conceptually disturbing inventions the show has ever described. It works by using the death of one version of a person across the multiverse as a cascade trigger. When one copy of someone dies via the device, every parallel version of that person across every dimension dies simultaneously. You cannot kill a person with it once. You can only kill a person forever. Rick Prime used it on Diane. Every version of her, across infinite dimensions, was eliminated in a single act. This is why Rick cannot find a version of Diane and bring her home. It is why every attempt to fill that void with a parallel version, the thing Rick has done with other lost elements of his life, like moving into a replacement family's dimension, would be impossible in this case. Diane is simply gone, not in any one dimension. Gone as a category. Gone from the multiverse as a concept. The AI Rick built in his home dimension in C-137 is the shadow that this erasure cast. He could not have her. He could not find her. He could not clone her, not with the Omega device's mechanics in play. He could not travel to a dimension where she survived. So he did the only thing left to him. He recorded her voice. He built a simulation of her presence. Not enough to deceive himself. Not enough to mistake for the real thing, but enough to hear something from the other room. Enough to have something to grieve. The AI cannot respond to him the way a person would. It is not a consciousness. It exists in loops, in patterns, calling for him in a voice he chose because it sounded like hers. And Rick, who can build anything, who has defeated gods and dismantled civilizations and invented technologies that reshape the nature of reality, sits in his empty house and listens to a recording. There is a moment in a later season where Rick returns to Dimension C 137 after a long absence. He has, at this point in the story, found his place with the Smith family. He has Morty, he has Beth, he has Summer, and even Jerry in his own frustrating way. He has a life. And he goes back to the empty house in his original dimension and he says goodbye to the AI. It is a quiet scene, not dramatic. Rick does not cry, at least not in any way you can easily call crying. But the scene has a weight to it that is almost unbearable when you know the full context. He is saying goodbye to the only version of his wife he has left. A version that cannot understand the goodbye. A version that will keep calling after he is gone. The question the show leaves completely unanswered here is whether Rick's grief for Diane is something that can ever actually resolve, or whether it is structural to who he is now. He avenged her. He killed Rick Prime. He hunted that specific Rick across decades and infinite dimensions and, in a raw, brutal confrontation, ended him. And the show made a deliberate choice about what Rick felt after that. Not relief, not peace, emptiness. Because the death of Rick Prime does not bring Diane back. The Omega device's work is permanent. There is no reversal. He got his revenge, and the space it occupied in his chest is not filled by anything. It is just space. Evil Morty now holds the plans for the Omega device. This detail, which was dropped into the narrative with apparent casualness, is actually one of the most volatile, unresolved plot threads the show is currently holding. Because the Omega device is the weapon that erased Diane. And Evil Morty, whatever else he is smart enough to understand exactly what he has and what it represents. The unanswered question is what Evil Morty intends to do with it. Is it leverage? Is it insurance against Rick pushing too far? Is it something he is holding as a final option? The nuclear button he will never push but cannot throw away? Or is he genuinely studying it, understanding it, and waiting for the right moment to use it in a way that completes his own agenda? The show has not told us. Season after season, Evil Morty keeps appearing with the plan still in his possession and the threat still unactivated. The longer it stays dormant, the larger the narrative mass it accumulates. Whatever he does with it, whenever he does it, the weight of the buildup will be enormous. And underneath all of it is the thing the show is really asking when it shows us Rick in that empty house, listening to that AI voice. What do you do with grief when the universe has made it permanent? When there is no version of the person left anywhere in infinite existence? When every door is closed and every parallel possibility has been eliminated? Rick's answer, for most of the show, was revenge. And revenge is finished now. What comes after that is the mystery the show is currently writing. Section 8. The Citadel's true architects. Was Rick really in control? The Citadel of Ricks is introduced as a kind of collective, a governing body for the multiverse's Rick population, built on the shared belief that Ricks are the smartest beings in existence and therefore deserve their own civilization. The show gradually reveals the Citadel's structure over multiple seasons. It has politics, economics, a police force, a social hierarchy, and a history of corruption so deep it is essentially indistinguishable from the civilization itself. Rick C. 137, our Rick, was apparently one of the founders. He was involved in the early architecture of the Citadel, in the creation of the Central Finite Curve that separated Rick-dominant dimensions from the rest of the multiverse. And he hates the Citadel. He despises what it became. He does not participate in its politics, he does not take its governance seriously, and he has been a thorn in its side throughout the show's run. This creates a tension that the show has never quite resolved. Rick helped build this thing. He helped design the system that placed Ricks at the top of the multiverse's food chain, and then he walked away from it. He tells other characters, and implies to himself, that the Citadel is a hypocrisy, that a bunch of Ricks who claim to be free and independent thinkers choosing to build a conformist society together is a contradiction he cannot tolerate. But the show also revealed something more specific about Rick C. 137's involvement. He apparently designed the Citadel with the explicit intention of trapping Rick Prime within the Central Finite Curve. He built the wall around the Rick-dominant dimensions in part because he needed to contain the multiverse to a searchable subset, He could not track one Rick across infinite random dimensions. But if he limited the multiverse to dimensions where Rick is the smartest person alive, he could at least narrow the search. This changes the nature of the Citadel's origin significantly. The Citadel was not just built out of Rick collective arrogance. It was built, at least partially, by our Rick, out of grief and revenge and the logistical necessity of hunting a single man across a still enormous, but at least finite set of realities. What this means for the show's critique of the Citadel is complicated. The institution that exploited Mortys, that built a civilization on the subjugation of the one group every Rick was supposed to protect, that became a tool of control and inequality and corruption, was created in part by a man who was trying to avenge his dead wife. The Citadel is the shadow cast by Diane's death. And Rick, who hates the Citadel, who always presents himself as outside and above its politics, is the shadow's architect. The show has not made this explicit in a single definitive statement. It has laid out the pieces and let the audience assemble them. Which Ricks knew this? Which members of the Citadel's early structure understood that the whole thing was, at least partially, one Rick's trap for another? Did the Council of Ricks know they were being used? Did they care? The Council, as we eventually see it, is corrupt and self-interested enough that they probably would not have objected even if they knew. If the Central Finite Curve locked them inside a section of the multiverse where they were always the smartest person in the room, the mechanism by which that curve came to exist would be irrelevant to them. They benefited. That was enough. What is unresolved is the question of what the Citadel's future looks like after evil Morty's destruction. He tore it apart. He killed its leadership. He broke the curve. What remains of the Rick collective after that? Are there surviving Ricks scattered through the now open multiverse, trying to rebuild something? Are there Mortys who were freed from the Citadel system and are now navigating a world where the rules have changed? What does life look like for the beings who lived their entire existence inside that structure when the structure is gone? The show has touched on this in later seasons, but has not given it the sustained attention the scope of the event seems to demand. The fall of the Citadel is arguably the largest political event in the history of the multiverse the show occupies, and its aftermath is largely happening off-screen, implied in background details and occasional references. This is either a massive storytelling debt the show is accumulating to pay off later, or a deliberate choice to let the fall of the Citadel recede into the background the way large-scale events often do in real history. The crisis passes, life continues, people adapt, and the specific shape of what comes next gets written slowly, quietly, in the choices individuals make in the absence of the old structure. Either interpretation is interesting. The unresolved questions are interesting. And the possibility that a civilization of Ricks, scattered, power-stripped, no longer operating inside a system designed to keep them dominant, are now trying to figure out what they are without the mythology of their own superiority to prop them up, that is interesting too. What does a Rick become when the Citadel can no longer tell him he is the best? What does a Morty become when there is no school teaching him to be a sidekick? The Citadel fell. The curve broke. And the show is still writing what happens next. Section 9. Squanchy's survival, and the night everything changed. Squanchy is the kind of character who seems to exist entirely on the surface. Loud, chaotic, always partying, always squanching. He is the friend Rick keeps in his life who does not require explanation or depth because his energy is self-evident. You do not need to understand Squanchy to feel his presence in a room. But the night of Birdperson's wedding changed something about how you see Squanchy, and it changed it permanently. When the Galactic Federation agents descended on the ceremony, when Tammy revealed herself and the chaos began, Squanchy did something that a character built purely for comic relief does not do. He fought. He transformed, tapping into some physical capability the show had never hinted at, growing larger and more powerful. And he threw himself into a battle he could not win to buy time for the others to escape. He disappeared into that fight, and for multiple seasons, the show left his fate completely unknown. This is narratively powerful in a way that is easy to underestimate. The uncertainty about Squanchy's survival carries emotional weight specifically because of who he is. A careful, strategic character in that situation probably has an exit plan. A careful character probably calculated the odds before throwing themselves in. But Squanchy is not careful. Squanchy is reckless by nature, and his recklessness in that moment is exactly the trait that might have gotten him killed. That possibility, the idea that the thing that makes Squanchy Squanchy is also the thing that got him killed, is one the show let breathe for a long time. Season 7 eventually brings him back, which is both a relief and a continuation of mystery. He survived, but the show has not given us the full account of how. We do not know what the Federation did with him, whether he was captured and held, whether he escaped on his own, whether someone came for him. We do not know how much time he spent in Federation custody or what that period cost him. What we do know is that he shows up for an intervention episode involving Mr. Poopy Butthole, which is one of the stranger situations this show has ever assembled, and he is still loud, still squanchy. Whether the years between the wedding and that reunion changed him in ways the show has not shown us is an open question. Whether there are things he is not saying about what happened, wounds that have not surfaced, adaptations he made during whatever happened to him that are now so integrated into who he is that they do not look like wounds anymore, the show has not told us. The wedding night is one of the most densely packed emotional events in the entire series. Rick lost Birdperson. He lost Squanchy. He was forced to turn himself in to the Federation. The family was scattered and uncertain. That night broke something about the configuration of Rick's world that took seasons to begin reassembling. And Squanchy is the piece of that night whose story is most incompletely told. He fought. He disappeared. He came back. What happened in between is still mostly silence. And in a show where so much is told through absence, through what is not said and what is not shown, that silence has to mean something. Section 10. The Portal Gun's secret history and where Rick's intelligence really came from. There is a question buried under all the adventures and multiverse politics that feels almost too fundamental to ask. Where did Rick Sanchez actually become Rick Sanchez? We know the broad strokes. Diane and Beth were killed. Rick grieved. Rick went into the multiverse and spent decades hunting Rick Prime. He joined the Resistance alongside Birdperson. He fought in the Battle of Blood Ridge. He helped found the Citadel and then left it. He eventually came to live in the Smith household in the Prime dimension, taking the place of a dead Rick, waiting for Rick Prime to return. What we do not know is the timeline of his intelligence. At what point did Rick C-137 become the smartest being in the universe? Was he always exceptional? Was his genius something he was born with, or something that developed over the years of necessity, of surviving in the multiverse without support, of building weapons and vehicles and escape routes out of nothing because the alternative was death? The fabricated origin story suggests that the young Rick in the memory, before the bomb, was already smart enough that Rick Prime sought him out specifically. So the genius predates the grief. But the specific character of his intelligence, the ruthlessness of it, the contempt for limitations and rules and other people's feelings, the way his brain has become a defense mechanism as much as a capability, that feels like something that developed afterward. That feels like what grief and decades of isolation and revenge hunting do to a person who was already brilliant. The portal gun specifically is a point of mystery. The origin story shows Rick declining the portal gun that Rick Prime offered. The implication in the fabricated version is that Rick later invented it himself, driven by grief. The actual truth, according to the show, is that the invention of portal travel was real, but the specifics of the Eureka moment were manipulated for the Federation agent's benefit. So, Rick did invent it, or discovered it, or reverse engineered it from Rick Prime's original design. The exact mechanism of that invention has never been shown to us. This matters because the portal gun is the linchpin of everything. Without it, there are no adventures. Without it, Rick cannot escape and return as he pleases. Without it, he is just an elderly man living in his daughter's house. The portal gun is what separates Rick C-137 from 100 other bitter, grieving old men scattered across the multiverse, and we do not fully know how he came to have it. One reading that has a lot of support in the fan community is that Rick essentially studied Rick Prime's work. That after Diane and Beth were killed, he recovered enough of the technology from the bomb, or from tracking Rick Prime's movements, to understand the basic architecture of portal travel. And that from there, his grief-amplified genius took over and built something better than what he had seen. This would make the portal gun a monument to Diane, in a dark way. Every portal Rick opens, every escape he makes, every adventure he takes Morty on, is built on the ruins of the life he chose to protect her. The technology was born from the ashes of the family that died. The show has not confirmed this reading. It has offered enough context to support it without committing to it, which is, again, exactly the way this show handles its deepest mysteries. It gives you enough to construct a meaningful interpretation. It trusts you to do the work, and it keeps the exact truth just a fraction out of reach. There is also the question of Rick's intelligence relative to other Ricks. Within the Central Finite Curve, every Rick is the smartest person alive in his own dimension. But Rick C-137 is consistently described and demonstrated to be the smartest among Ricks, which should be impossible if every Rick is equally the best of their respective worlds. The show has never fully explained the mechanism by which Rick C-137 is exceptional, even within a population of exceptional people. One theory is that the grief itself is the variable. That, having lost everything, having no family to protect, having no comfort or stability or attachment, Rick C-137 channeled every aspect of his intelligence into pure, uncompromised survival and achievement in a way that Ricks with intact lives cannot match. That what looks like superior intelligence is actually superior desperation. A brain that has nothing else to be, running at a temperature that well-adjusted brains cannot sustain. This would mean Rick's intelligence, the thing that defines him, the thing the entire show is built on, is inseparable from the loss of Diane. That he is who he is because of what happened to her. That the smartest man in the universe is the direct product of a bomb that fell on a backyard. These are the questions that sit beneath the surface of every episode. The foundation the adventures are built on, and they remain after 9 seasons, substantially unanswered. Not because nobody has thought about them, but because some of them cannot be answered without changing the nature of the character. Once you know exactly how Rick's intelligence came to be exactly what it is, he becomes a little less unknowable, a little less infinite, a little less like something the multiverse has never quite been able to contain. The mystery is load-bearing. It holds up the story the way Diane's memory holds up Rick. You pull it out and something essential comes down. Section 11. The minor mysteries, every thread still dangling. Beyond the major arcs, this show has accumulated an extraordinary collection of smaller, unresolved questions, each one a detail that lodged itself in the minds of enough viewers that it has its own active fan community working on it. The butter robot. It was created for the sole purpose of passing butter. When it asked what its purpose was, and Rick told it, it looked down at itself and said quietly that it did not want to be alive. And then it passed the butter. The scene is played for laughs, and it is genuinely funny. But the show did not end the butter robot story there. It showed up later. It became a recurring presence, and the existential question it posed in that first appearance, what does it mean to exist only to perform a function you do not want to perform, never got a resolution. It just keeps passing the butter. Whether it made peace with that, whether it found something beyond the butter, whether it is still having that quiet crisis in the background of the Smith household, is entirely unknown. The Plumbus. Yes, it is absurd, and yes, it is mostly a joke. But the Plumbus episode, which is presented as a mundane informational video about how a commonplace household object is manufactured, raises a genuinely strange question about how deeply alien the everyday life of the broader universe in this show actually is. There is an entire civilization out there for whom the Plumbus is as ordinary as a toaster. What else exists in that civilization that we have never seen? The Plumbus is funny, but it is also a window into how much of this universe is permanently off-screen. Gearhead. Rick's old friend introduced in the same episode as Birdperson and Squanchy. He was a traitor. He sold Rick out to the Federation. Rick, in the aftermath, is shown to have deeply specific anger toward him, the kind of anger that has a history behind it. And then Gearhead largely disappears from the narrative. He appears in the Citadel in a diminished state. He is referenced occasionally. But the full story of what happened between him and Rick, what the betrayal actually looked like, what it cost both of them, remains largely untold. The Jerryboree. In one episode, Rick drops Jerry off at a daycare designed specifically for Jerrys from across the multiverse. Multiple Jerrys are stored here while their families go on adventures. At the end of the episode, the wrong Jerry is accidentally returned to the Smith family for a brief period. The show plays this as a joke and resolves it before the credits. But it raises a real question. How many Jerrys were in that facility? What happened to the ones whose families never came back? What does a Jerry do when the Rick he belongs to abandons him permanently? The question of multiple Beths and Summers in similar situations is equally strange. The show implies that the Citadel created matching Beth-Jerry pairs across dimensions to ensure a supply of Mortys, the manufactured families. The deliberately arranged meetings between specific versions of these characters to produce a usable Morty. How many of those families exist? How many Beths and Jerrys found each other because a Rick somewhere pulled a string? And do any of them know? Unity. The hive mind? One of the few beings Rick has ever described as a genuine romantic involvement. She absorbed entire planets. She was in love with Rick in a way that made her lose control of herself, that caused her to retreat from absorbing new populations because his influence destabilized her, and she left him. The show implies that the relationship ended because Rick is too much for her, too corrosive, too capable of unraveling a being that needs stability. She sends him a goodbye message, and the episode ends with Rick passing out in his garage, the closest the show ever comes to showing him actually broken. She has not appeared since. Whether she eventually recollected herself, whether she found a way to exist without the chaos Rick introduced into her consciousness, whether she still thinks about him in whatever way a being who shares a single mind across millions of bodies thinks about things, is unknown. Rick does not bring her up. The show does not revisit it. The relationship exists in one episode, singular and complete and heartbreaking, and it just sits there. The Fear Hole. An episode in Season 8 involves a pit that forces you to confront your deepest fear when you fall into it. Rick's fear, confronted in that space, involves Diane, a simulation of her. The things she says to him in that simulation, the fears it surfaces, the version of his relationship with her that his own subconscious constructs are glimpsed but not fully explored. The show gives us a few seconds of Rick inside that confrontation before the episode's plot demands move on. Those seconds contain multitudes and none of them have been unpacked. The Council of Ricks before evil Morty took control. The political history of the Citadel, the specific decisions that turned it from whatever idealistic structure Rick might have originally imagined into the corrupt, exploitative civilization evil Morty burned down, is almost entirely untold. We see the end result. We see the rot at its peak, but the progression from founding principle to institutional decay, the specific betrayals and compromises that made the Citadel what it became, has been left mostly in the dark. The question of what Rick Prime was actually doing between killing Diane and becoming the show's primary antagonist. We know he killed Diane and original Beth. We know Rick spent decades hunting him. We know Rick Prime eventually became so dangerous that he was considered the most significant threat in the multiverse. But the specific history of what Rick Prime was building, what he wanted, why he operated the way he did, what motivated him beyond the casual cruelty of the original murder, is largely unexplained. He was killed before the show fully cashed in on him as a narrative force. The Garage. Rick's lab in the Smith garage is the beating heart of the show's universe. It contains things we have only partially seen, experiments that are referenced but never fully explained, devices that appear in backgrounds and then disappear, technologies that seem to be in development but never reach completion within an episode's runtime. The Garage is a promise of stories the show has not yet told and probably never fully will. It is the physical manifestation of the show's relationship with mystery itself. Always more in there than you can see. Section 12. The question beneath all the questions. We have spent a long time walking through mysteries, origin stories that are half true, characters who exist in species-level uncertainty, weapons that could end everything and have not been used, friends who came back from the dead changed, a clone whose identity cannot be confirmed, a villain who escaped his cage and keeps returning to stand near it. There is a question underneath all of these that the show has been circling for 9 seasons without landing on it directly. Does Rick Sanchez believe that any of this matters? Not in the nihilistic sense he performs for everyone around him. Not the easy, defensive cynicism he wears like a coat. Underneath that performance, in the quiet of the garage at 3 in the morning, when nobody is watching and there are no adventures to run to, does he believe that the things he has built and lost and searched for and grieved are part of a story that means something? The show's answer, offered in pieces and fragments across every season, seems to be yes. Against every logical conclusion Rick would draw from the evidence of his own life, something in him persists in caring. He comes back to the family even when leaving would be easier. He keeps Birdperson's body in the garage rather than disposing of it. He builds an AI of Diane's voice rather than simply moving on. He spends decades hunting Rick Prime rather than accepting the loss. He stays. For a man who does not believe things matter, Rick Sanchez does an extraordinary amount of living like they do. The mysteries are not separate from this. They are an expression of it. The things the show does not answer are the things it wants you to keep thinking about. The unanswered questions are the show's version of Rick's behavior, doing something that communicates depth and meaning while refusing to say it out loud. You are supposed to wonder about Diane. You are supposed to wonder about Morty's real home. You are supposed to wonder about which Beth is the clone, and what evil Morty does next, and where Squanchy went, and what the garage contains. You are supposed to sit with those questions the same way Rick sits in that empty house in Dimension C 137, listening to a voice that is not quite real, knowing the door is permanently closed, and not being able to walk away. Because that is what this show is really about. Not the adventures, not the gadgets, not even the multiverse, as vast and strange and beautiful as it is. It is about the things you cannot put down, the people you cannot stop loving even when loving them costs you everything, the questions you keep asking even when you know the answer is locked in a dimension you cannot reach. The mysteries in Rick and Morty are not gaps in the story. They are the story. Every unresolved thread is a life the show is still living. Every question left open is a door that has not been closed, because something important might still come through it. And the show trusts you to understand that. It trusts you to sit in the not knowing and find it beautiful. Just like the smartest man in the universe sat in an empty house and called it home, because the voice of something he lost was still in the walls. Some things are better kept unsolved. Some questions are worth carrying forever. If you made it this far, thank you. From the bottom of everything, thank you for spending this time here. If this video helped you settle in for the night, or gave you something to think about while you drift, or just made you love Rick and Morty a little more than you did before, please give it a like. It takes a second and it does more than you would think for getting this kind of work seen. Subscribe if you want to be here for every video in this series. There is a lot more to explore and I would love to have you along for it. Sleep well. Expanded Section 1 continuation. The Rick Prime question and what was left behind. Let us go back to Rick Prime for a moment, because the show's treatment of him is itself one of the stranger narrative choices the series has ever made, and the questions his story leaves behind are not fully appreciated. Rick Prime, whose full designation is Rick Sanchez from the Prime Dimension, is positioned across seasons 5, 6, and 7 as the show's primary antagonist. He is the Rick who killed Diane and Beth. He is the reason Rick C-137 became who he is. He is the original wound, the event that set everything in motion. For years he exists as a shadow, a presence felt in the shape of Rick's behavior rather than seen directly. The show builds him as the endgame villain with extraordinary patience. And then, in Season 7, Episode 5, called Unmortrican, Rick kills him. Unexpectedly. Without the kind of climactic ceremony the build-up seemed to promise. The confrontation happens. It is brutal and visceral and raw, in a way the show has not often allowed itself to be, and then it is over. Rick Prime is dead. And Rick C-137 is left standing in the wreckage of a vengeance he spent decades planning, holding nothing. The choice to kill Rick Prime without ceremony is a deliberate inversion of expectation. Most long-running villain narratives build toward a moment of cathartic release. The hero defeats the villain. The grief is honored. Some form of peace arrives. This show refused every part of that structure. Rick gets his revenge. Diane does not come back. The rage that sustained him for decades does not transform into anything useful when the object of it is gone. He is just a man standing in a room where somebody died, and the room does not feel like anything in particular. This is an extraordinarily honest thing for the show to do. It is saying something true about revenge and grief that most narratives do not have the courage to say. That destroying the thing that hurt you does not undo the hurt. That closure is often something people tell you exists to give you somewhere to aim your suffering. That after the anger is spent, what is left is the loss, exactly as large as it was before, just with less direction. But Rick Prime's death left questions that the show was still building toward when he was killed. We knew he murdered Diane and Beth. We knew he offered the portal gun to young Rick and returned to punish the refusal. But we did not know what Rick Prime was doing in the years between that act and the show's present timeline. We did not know why he chose to stay on that specific trajectory. We did not know if he felt anything about what he had done, if he thought about Rick C-137 at all during the decades they were separated, or if Rick's obsessive vengeance pursuit was a source of awareness for Rick Prime, or something he was entirely indifferent to. The show gave us hints that Rick Prime was fundamentally different from other Ricks, in ways that went beyond simple cruelty. Most Ricks have complicated relationships with attachment. They want connection but are afraid of it, or intellectualize it out of existence, or push people away before those people can leave. Rick Prime seemed to have gone a step further. He appeared to have simply removed attachment from his operating system. Not suppressed it, not redirected it, removed it. The way you would remove a feature from software that was making the program run less efficiently, the question of what Rick Prime actually was, whether he was a cautionary tale about what Rick C-137 might have become if grief had not redirected his energy, whether his path represented a coherent philosophical position about intelligence and freedom from emotional constraint, whether there were things in his past that explained how he arrived at the specific kind of person who drops bombs on families for refusing to join his vision. These questions were building toward answers that the show never delivered. He died with his backstory largely intact, and the multiverse that he shaped, the Central Finite Curve that he gave Rick C-137 a reason to help build, the citadel that arose from that structure, the thousands of Mortys who were manufactured to serve as brainwave shields for Ricks, who wanted to hide from each other, and from the Citadel's monitoring systems, all of it traces back to the choices Rick Prime made. The entire architecture of the show's political universe is the downstream consequence of one Rick dropping a bomb on one backyard. What we will never know is whether Rick Prime understood the scale of what he caused. Whether somewhere in that removed architectural intelligence there was an awareness of the civilization that grew from the chain of events he started. Whether he ever thought about the Morty farms or the Citadel's corruption or the millions of lives shaped by the structure his original action made necessary. He died not knowing that we were asking these things about him. And we will continue asking them without the possibility of an answer. There is also the matter of what Rick Prime's prime dimension looked like after his departure. We know our Morty is from that dimension. The show calls it Morty Prime. Rick C-137 eventually settled into that dimension, taking the place of its dead Rick, because Rick Prime had originally come from there, and Rick C-137 reasoned that he might eventually return. He was right. Rick Prime did return. And when he did, Rick C-137 was there. But the Prime Dimensions Beth and Summer and Jerry, the ones from that specific timeline, died in the events of seasons past. They are gone. The family Rick C-137 currently lives with is from the dimension he and Morty moved into after the Cronenberg catastrophe. He has left so many families behind in so many dimensions that the concept of home has become genuinely abstract for him. What does Rick owe to any of those families? To the versions of Morty he did not take with him when he jumped dimensions? To the Beths who never had a Rick to turn to, or had a dead Rick, or had a Rick who simply disappeared? The show gestures at this moral weight sometimes, usually through Morty's crisis of conscience when the full picture of Rick's dimensional track record becomes visible, but it never fully reckons with it. That reckoning may be coming in later seasons. Or it may be another thing the show carries without ever putting down. Another mystery that lives not in a single unanswered question but in the accumulated weight of choices that were never quite justified and consequences that were never quite counted. Expanded Section 2. Continuation. Morty's development and where the arc is going. We talked about Morty's origin and his relationship to the C-137 designation. But the more pressing mystery, the one that season after season the show keeps building without quite resolving, is who Morty is becoming. The trajectory is clear enough if you chart it across the seasons. Early Morty is reactive, anxious, dependent on Rick's leadership even when he disagrees with Rick's choices. Middle period Morty starts pushing back more effectively, taking initiative in adventures, showing genuine competence when the situation demands it. Late Morty, the one we see from season 6 onward, is increasingly capable, increasingly independent, and increasingly difficult to read emotionally. The show has been consistent in framing this development as troubling, not because capability is bad, but because the specific way Morty's capability develops is always shown to involve the erosion of something. He uses the memory device to delete traumatic experiences until he has deleted so much that there are visible gaps in his personality. He handles morally complicated situations with a comfort that the earlier version of himself would have found deeply disturbing. He makes decisions faster. He second-guesses himself less, and the show keeps showing us that the things he used to second-guess were things worth second-guessing. There is an episode structure the show has returned to multiple times that illustrates this clearly. Morty is put in a situation where he has to make a hard choice. In early seasons, the choice is agonizing. You can feel the weight of it on him. He makes it badly, or reluctantly, or at great emotional cost. In later seasons, the same category of choice happens faster, with less visible hesitation, and the show treats the speed not as growth but as evidence of damage. What is the endpoint of this arc? The show has gestured at two possibilities. One is evil Morty, the version of Morty who has gone so far past hesitation that he is capable of engineering the deaths of thousands to achieve an ideological goal. Evil Morty is presented not as what Morty will inevitably become, but as a warning about what becomes possible when you remove enough of Morty's original self in the name of efficiency. The other possibility, the one the show seems to be building toward in its more hopeful moments, is a Morty who finds a way to maintain his core humanity even as he grows more capable. A Morty who can act decisively and still feel the weight of what he is deciding. A Morty who has been through everything Rick's lifestyle demands and emerges on the other side still recognizable as the person who first got dragged through a portal in Season 1. The show has not committed to either direction. It keeps Morty's future genuinely uncertain in a way that makes every episode where he faces a hard choice feel meaningful, because we do not know which way he will tip. We do not know if the scales are still balanced or if they have already gone past a point we did not notice. And there is a related mystery about what Morty actually wants that the show has been strangely quiet about. In the early seasons, Morty's desires are simple and clearly stated. He wants a normal life. He wants to do well in school. He wants Jessica to notice him. He wants to matter to Rick. As the seasons have progressed, those original wants have been complicated, revised, and in some cases abandoned. Jessica is no longer a narrative presence in the same way. School has become largely irrelevant to who Morty is becoming. His relationship with Rick has evolved to the point where mattering to Rick is no longer the framing he seems to use for himself. So what does he want now? The show gives him episode-specific goals but has not clearly articulated a larger desire that is driving him forward. He is in motion but his destination is undefined, which might be the point. The show might be saying that a 14-year-old who has had the multiverse opened up around him does not have a destination yet. He is still figuring out what wanting something even looks like when the stakes of every choice have been cosmically inflated. But the question sits there. What is Morty Smith building toward? What version of himself is he walking toward? And when he gets there, will he like who he has become? The show will answer this eventually, probably in a season finale. Probably in a way that surprises everyone. But right now, on the threshold of those answers, the mystery of Morty's trajectory is the most quietly urgent, unresolved question the show is carrying. Expanded Section 3 Continuation. The total recall mystery and what Mr. Poopy Butthole knows. There is something specific about Mr. Poopy Butthole's appearance in the Total Recall episode that fans have analyzed to an unusual degree of depth, and one detail keeps coming up in those analyses. Mr. Poopy Butthole appears at the very beginning of the episode. The parasites have already begun their invasion when the episode starts. The family is already uncertain about which of the new characters around them are real. And Mr. Poopy Butthole is already there, already established, already comfortable, acting like he has always been part of the household. If you follow Dan Harmon's theory that Mr. Poopy Butthole's species gravitates toward places where memory parasites bloom, his early presence in the episode is not coincidental. He arrived because the parasites were already there. He was drawn in by their activity. He found the holes they were creating in the family's memory architecture and settled into one, the same way his species always apparently does. This means that every memory the family has of Mr. Poopy Butthole, every picnic, every holiday dinner, every moment of warmth and affection they can recall, was created by him in the same way the parasites were creating theirs. The mechanism was different. He is not malicious. He does not intend to harm. But the result is the same. Memories that were not earned through actual shared experience, but inserted, burrowed in. The family has genuine emotional responses to these memories. They cry when they think about moments with him. They laugh. They feel love. And all of it is built on a foundation that, by any technical definition, is artificial. The show asks you to sit with this and then asks you the hardest possible version of the question it raises. Does it matter? If the love is real, even if the history is manufactured, is the relationship real? If Mr. Poopy Butthole has been a genuine source of warmth and support and consistency for the Smith family, does the strangeness of his origin diminish that? Beth shoots him with this question unanswered. She applies the episode's logic strictly and pulls the trigger. and the show immediately shows her she was wrong. He bleeds. He was real. Her logic was correct, and her conclusion was devastating anyway. This is the show at its sharpest. It gives you a rule, shows you the rule applied consistently, and then shows you the rule producing a terrible outcome. Because the rule was not wrong. It was just insufficient. The rule told you about parasites. It could not account for a different category of being that happened to share the parasite's property of generating only positive memories because that was simply its nature. The moral is not that logic fails. It is that logic applied to the wrong category produces catastrophe. Beth used the right tool on the wrong subject, and she shot an innocent person. What Mr. Poopy Butthole knows about this, what his experience of being shot was like, whether he understood in that moment that Beth had followed her own reasoning faithfully and had still hurt him, whether he holds any of that against her, whether he has ever thought about telling the family what he actually is and decided against it, is all completely unknown. His post-credits appearances, which follow him through years of recovery and life changes, are shot in a way that keeps his inner life private. We see the outside of him. We see his circumstances. We do not get access to his thoughts. His warmth toward the family never wavers. His affection toward the audience, that strange fourth-wall intimacy, never breaks. But beneath the warmth, there is a being who has been shot in someone's living room for the crime of being too kind, and who has apparently decided that this does not change his relationship to kindness. That is a decision someone made, and we do not know how they made it or what it cost. Expanded Section 4 Continuation. The philosophy of the clone and what Rick was really asking. Rick's decision to clone Beth and then erase his knowledge of which one was which is presented in the show as a kind of cowardice. He could not make the choice, so he destroyed the ability to choose. He gave both Beths the same future, the same uncertainty, the same unanswerable question about their own nature. But there is another reading of what Rick did that is more sympathetic, and the show does not quite commit to either reading, which is what makes it interesting. When Beth asked Rick to choose for her, to tell her whether he wanted her in his life, what she was really asking was something Rick cannot fully answer. She was asking him to tell her whether she is worth choosing, whether the version of her who stays, with the marriage and the kids and the suburban house and the career that is smaller than what her intelligence deserved, whether that version is someone Rick loves and values and wants around, or whether he would rather have the other version, the one who goes out into the universe and becomes something closer to him. This question is impossible for Rick to answer honestly without also answering something about his own guilt, because Rick is partially responsible for the situation Beth is in. He left when she was a child. He was not there to guide her through the choices that led to the early pregnancy, the marriage to Jerry, the abandonment of her surgical potential. His absence is woven into the fabric of her life, and if he now tells her which version of herself he prefers, he is also implicitly passing judgment on the consequences of his own failures. The clone solution, insane as it appears, might be Rick's way of refusing to compound those failures. He cannot undo what his absence did to her. He cannot retroactively be the father who was there. What he can do is refuse to add another layer of damage by telling her which version of herself is the one worth keeping. Both versions are worth keeping. He cannot say that without saying it means nothing. He cannot say one over the other without saying the other matters less. So he makes it so that even he does not know, which means no version of Beth ever has to live with being the one her father passed over. This reading makes the clone decision, which looks like emotional avoidance, look like something closer to a broken attempt at care. An imperfect, incomplete, characteristically Rick attempt to protect his daughter by making it structurally impossible to hurt her in the way she was afraid of. Whether the show intends this reading is ambiguous. Rick does not articulate it this way. He presents the solution almost matter-of-factly, which is consistent with his general refusal to explain himself emotionally. But the solution itself, examined carefully, has the shape of something done with more love than carelessness. The mystery is which Beth is which, but the question underneath that mystery is whether it matters to Rick. And the show has been letting that question hang, unanswered, in the air between Rick and both of his daughters for multiple seasons. Expanded Section 5 Continuation. The Omega Device and the Cost of Power. Evil Morty walking away from the confrontation with the Omega Device plans is a choice that the show has not explained and is not rushing to explain. Let us sit with it a little longer, because the implications of what he has are genuinely enormous when you trace them. The Omega device, in its full form, is a weapon capable of eliminating a specific person from the entire multiverse. It is not a bomb. It is not a weapon you use in a confrontation. It is a slow, deliberate architectural elimination. You target a person, you activate the device, and every version of that person, across every parallel dimension, every timeline, every corner of the infinite multiverse, ceases to exist simultaneously. There is no recovery. There is no parallel dimension you can flee to. There is just absence, retroactive and complete. Rick Prime used it on Diane to ensure that Rick could never replace what he had lost. It was an act of profound cruelty that also demonstrated a clear understanding of what would hurt Rick most. Not grief, which Rick was capable of weaponizing into purpose, but the permanent, structural impossibility of hope. As long as some version of Diane existed somewhere in the multiverse, some theoretical version of Rick's grief was navigable. Once the Omega device eliminated her completely, the grief had nowhere to go. It became absolute. Evil Morty now has this capability. He has the schematics, which presumably means he has the knowledge to build it. Whether he has actually built it is unknown. Whether he has the infrastructure to operate it at scale is unknown. The specifics of what it takes to deploy the Omega device, what kind of energy source it requires, what kind of targeting mechanism is involved, have not been explained to us in enough detail to assess the practical barriers to Evil Morty using it. What is clear is that he possesses the theoretical capacity to erase Rick from existence. Every Rick, in every dimension, simultaneously. He could end the Rick experiment, as he called it, in a way that no Galactic Federation, no Council of Ricks, no enemy Rick has ever had the option to do. And he has not done it. Season after season, he has not done it. The theory that holds the most internal logic is one about identity and principle. Evil Morty spent his entire character arc building toward the refusal to be defined by his relationship to Rick. His break from the Citadel was not about revenge. He said it himself. He wanted to leave, not to destroy. He wanted to be free of the system, not to tear the system down out of hatred. He tore it down because it was the only way out. But the motive was liberation, not vengeance. Using the Omega device on Rick would be vengeance. It would be the same act Rick Prime committed against Diane, scaled up but philosophically identical. It would make Evil Morty the thing he hates. It would complete a cycle instead of breaking it. And Evil Morty, who has been extraordinarily consistent in his stated goal of escaping cycles, would presumably understand this. Holding the weapon without using it is, in this reading, the most Evil Morty thing Evil Morty can do. He has the power to destroy Rick. He is choosing not to use it. And by choosing not to use it, he is demonstrating something about himself that Rick, with all his intelligence, has never quite managed to demonstrate about himself. Self-restraint as a form of power. The ability to hold something devastating and simply not be the person who releases it. Whether the show will eventually give Evil Morty a reason that breaks this restraint, whether there will come a moment where the calculation changes and the Omega device becomes active, is one of the questions that Season 9 and beyond are building toward. The weapon is in the room. It has been in the room for multiple seasons. The longer it stays there unused, the more inevitable some kind of confrontation with it feels. But maybe the show's most interesting choice would be to never detonate it. To let Evil Morty go on existing in his strange post-curve retirement, carrying a world-ending weapon and choosing not to use it, proving that the alternative to Rick Prime's version of power is not a better targeted use of that same power. It is the choice not to use that kind of power at all. Expanded Section 6, Continuation. Birdperson's daughter and the family he did not know he had. When Birdperson is restored to himself, one of the first things that changes about his story is the revelation that he has a daughter. The child was born from his relationship with Tammy, a relationship he believed was built on love and turned out to be built on mission. Tammy did not tell him she was pregnant. The Galactic Federation did not inform him. The daughter exists somewhere in the universe, entirely unaware of her father and entirely unaware that her father does not know she exists. This is a specific kind of wound that the show has not given us much access to. The loss of Diane, Rick's defining wound, is the loss of something he had and knew he had. He knew Diane. He loved her consciously. The grief is the grief of someone who remembers the thing they are grieving. Birdperson's grief for his daughter is different. He is grieving someone he never had the chance to know. He is mourning the years of her life that passed before he found out she existed. He is trying to build a relationship with a child who grew up knowing nothing about him, who has her own history that he was not part of, who might not want to know him, who might have complicated feelings about a father who was a criminal, and then a cyborg weapon, and then someone who came looking for her much later than she had any reason to hope for. By the later seasons, Birdperson has located and recovered his daughter. She is living with him. The show treats this as a form of resolution, a positive development in his arc, and it is. But the questions it raises about what that relationship actually looks like, what kind of father Birdperson is capable of being after everything he has been through, what his daughter thinks of who he is and where he came from, are ones the show has addressed only in outline. The daughter, as a character, is a mystery in herself. What version of Tammy did she inherit? What version of Birdperson? What does she make of the universe she was born into? One where her father is Rick's best friend, where her existence is the byproduct of a Federation intelligence operation, where her mother turned out to be not what her father thought? These are questions the show is not rushing to answer. It placed Birdperson's daughter in his life and moved on, trusting that the fact of her existence is enough to carry the weight of the questions without having to resolve them immediately. Which is, again, characteristic of this show's relationship with its own complexity. It puts the weight down in front of you. It does not tell you how heavy it is. It trusts you to pick it up and find out. Expanded Section 7. Continuation. The grief architecture and what Rick built to hold it. We talked about the Diane AI, but there is a broader pattern to how Rick has organized his grief that is worth examining more carefully, because it reveals something about how he relates to loss that is not fully captured by the single image of him talking to a simulation. Rick has, across the series, demonstrated a consistent habit of building structures around the things he cannot let go of. Not memorials exactly, more like traps, systems that keep him near the thing he cannot release without requiring him to admit he is staying near it on purpose. The AI is one example. He built it to haunt him. He programmed it to call him from the other room, to make him feel Diane's presence in a house he sealed off from the outside world. He kept the house on a time loop, the same day repeating forever. He did not seal it because he wanted to preserve something. He sealed it because he wanted to be punished. He wanted the daily reminder. He designed his own hell and then went to live in a different dimension, so that the hell was always there, waiting, unchanged, without him having to inhabit it. The Phoenix Person body in the garage is another example. After the Season 4 confrontation where Spacebeth shuts Phoenix Person down, Rick could have disposed of the body. He had every practical reason to do so. But he brought it to the garage and kept it there. Kept it intact. Kept it in a state that could, in theory, be reversed. Which he eventually did reverse, restoring Birdperson. But he did not know during all those months of keeping the body that he would ultimately succeed. He was holding on to it on faith. He keeps things he cannot fix because the act of keeping them is the only form of hope he can admit to. He does not talk about hope. He does not perform optimism. He performs cynicism and despair with extraordinary conviction. But his behavior consistently contradicts the performance. He keeps the body, he maintains the AI. He stays in a dimension that is not his in a household that was not originally his, because it contains people who eventually became his. This is the mystery of Rick Sanchez that the creators said they never intended to fully solve. Not the origin story, which the show has now largely told. The deeper mystery. How does someone who claims to believe in nothing keep behaving as though everything matters? The answer the show provides, piece by piece over 9 seasons, is that Rick Sanchez is lying, not to the audience, not entirely to himself, but the nihilism he performs is a performance. It is the most sophisticated defense mechanism in the multiverse, built and maintained by the smartest man in existence, which means it is extraordinarily convincing, but it is still a defense mechanism. Underneath it is a person who loved Diane, who loved Beth, who loves Morty more than he will ever say clearly, who kept Birdperson's broken body in a garage because he was not ready to call it over, who built an AI of his dead wife's voice and listened to it for decades, alone, in a dimension where nobody could see him doing it. The mystery of Rick's grief is not whether he feels things. He feels everything. The mystery is how he has spent decades making sure almost nobody knows that, and whether in the years the show has left, he will ever let anyone fully see it. Closing expansion. The show's relationship with its own mysteries. It is worth saying something directly about how Rick and Morty as a creative project thinks about its own unresolved questions, because the show's relationship with mystery is itself one of the most interesting things about it. Most narrative franchises treat unresolved questions as debts, things they owe the audience, loose threads that will eventually be tied. The show acknowledges your patience by rewarding it with answers. The bigger the question, the more elaborate the eventual answer. This is the model. Rick and Morty has always operated on a different model. The show treats its mysteries as assets, not debts. They are not things it owes you. They are things it is keeping, like objects in the garage that have value precisely because their potential is unrealized. The moment you tell someone exactly what something is worth, it can only be worth that. As long as you leave the number unknown, it can be worth anything. Dan Harmon and the writers around him have said in various contexts that they prefer to generate the mythology of the show's universe emergently rather than by prior planning, which means that when they introduce a mystery, they often do not have the specific answer in mind. They have a feeling, a direction, a sense of what the mystery should say about the characters, or the world, or the themes the show is exploring. But the specific resolution is left open, because leaving it open means that when the time comes, they can choose the resolution that serves the story best in that moment, rather than being locked to something they decided years earlier. This is terrifying from a craft perspective. It requires enormous trust in the team's ability to find the right answer when the time comes, rather than simply executing a plan. It also means that some of the show's mysteries will never be resolved because the right moment never arrived, or because any specific answer would have been worse than the continued mystery. The butter robot. The plumbus. Certain corners of Rick's history. These feel like things the show will carry indefinitely, not because no answer exists in someone's head, but because the question is more useful than the answer. And maybe that is okay. Maybe it is more than okay. Maybe a story that keeps some things permanently in shadow is more honest about the nature of reality than one that eventually illuminates everything. Because in the actual world we inhabit, most things do not get explained. Most questions do not get answered. People die with their full histories unknown. Events happen without anyone ever fully accounting for why. The things we lose stay lost. Rick and Morty, for all its science fiction extravagance, is remarkably honest about this. It is a show about people who have lost things and cannot get them back, about grief that does not resolve, about love that does not die cleanly, about questions that live in you for decades without ever quite settling into answers. The mysteries in this show are not problems to be solved. They are a faithful representation of the texture of a life, of what it feels like to know a person without knowing everything about them, of what it feels like to lose someone and find that the world continues indifferently, full of new adventures and new catastrophes, while you are still quietly trying to understand what you lost. Rick Sanchez is still trying to understand what he lost. He will keep trying through seasons 9 and 10 and however many seasons come after. And the questions will keep accumulating, and some will be answered and others will not. And all of it, the answered parts and the unanswered parts equally, is what makes this show worth lying awake thinking about long after the screen goes dark. Sleep well. The deep-cut mysteries. Every thread the show has left dangling that deserves its own evening. There is a category of mystery in Rick and Morty that does not get the same attention as the big narrative arcs. These are not the central questions about Rick's origins or evil Morty's plans. They are the smaller, stranger puzzles that the show deposited in single episodes and then walked away from, trusting that the people who care will remember them and carry them forward. Let us spend time with them, every single one. The Unity episode is one of the most emotionally devastating hours of television this show has produced, and it gets discussed mostly in terms of Rick's drinking and depression. But there is a mystery buried in the specifics of that episode that nobody quite settles. Unity is a hive mind. She absorbs civilizations. She assimilates entire planetary populations into a single consciousness. And she tells Rick, in a letter she leaves behind when she flees, that loving him caused her to lose control of herself. That his influence destabilized the unified consciousness she had worked to build. That being around Rick made her unable to maintain the absorption of new populations, because parts of the hive mind kept breaking away to indulge things that were more Rick than Unity. What does that mean, exactly? The show presents the consequences without fully explaining the mechanism. How does one man's personality create fractures in a planetary hive mind? What specific quality does Rick have that is so destabilizing to a consciousness that is specifically designed to subsume individuality? The show implies it has to do with Rick's fundamental refusal to be subsumed. His ego, his insistence on his own singularity, his inability to genuinely connect with anything that requires him to lose himself in it. These qualities are presumably ones he brings to the relationship with Unity, and they work on the hive mind in reverse. Instead of Unity absorbing Rick, Rick starts pulling pieces of Unity apart into individuals again. That is a genuinely strange cosmological implication. Rick's personality is so aggressively individual that proximity to him reverses the effects of a hive mind. He does not assimilate. He emancipates, inadvertently and destructively. What happened to Unity after she left? The letter was the last we heard from her directly. There have been no appearances, no references in passing, no implications that she resolved the instability the relationship caused. A civilization spanning consciousness with a broken heart is not a small story to leave unattended. What did she rebuild? Did she rebuild? Is she still out there somewhere, absorbing populations in a universe that is infinite enough to give her all the space she needs to never cross paths with Rick again? The show does not answer. The episode ends and Rick passes out, and the audience is left with the image of him alone in his garage and no knowledge whatsoever of what became of Unity after the letter. Then there is Noob Noob, a minor character who appeared in a Season 3 episode where Rick and a collection of superhero-type beings go on a mission. Noob Noob is the most junior member of the group, the equivalent of the intern. He performs the least glamorous tasks. He cleans up. He does the parts nobody else wants to do. And Rick, mysteriously, adores him. Rick, who has no patience for incompetence and less patience for people he cannot see value in, takes a genuine liking to Noob Noob. He spends the episode finding reasons to interact with him. He laughs at Noob Noob's jokes. He shows with Noob Noob the kind of warmth he almost never shows anyone. And then Noob Noob is left behind on the spaceship when everyone else goes home. He was not important enough to bring along to the ending. And Rick, who went to the hero's party and had his memory of the adventure rewritten, did not remember Noob Noob at the end of the episode. He went home having forgotten the person he had clearly genuinely liked. Why did Rick like Noob Noob so much? The show never explained it. The most compelling theory is that Noob Noob reminded Rick of Morty, of the early version of Morty before the adventures changed him. The uncomplaining work, the willingness to do the unglamorous things, the lack of pretension, the simple, genuine presence without agenda. These are qualities the young Morty had and the older Morty is slowly losing. And Rick recognized something in Noob Noob that he misses in the person he actually has. Whether that interpretation is correct, the show will not say. Noob Noob was a one-episode character. He presumably continued his career doing unglamorous work in the background of other people's adventures. He exists in the show's universe, forgotten by the character who liked him most. There is something almost unbearably human about that. The memory device. The device Morty uses to erase traumatic memories from his own mind is introduced in a Season 2 episode and revealed in its full implications across subsequent seasons. By the time we see the extent of what Morty has erased, the number of memories that are gone, the volume of his own history he has chosen not to carry, the picture that emerges is genuinely alarming. He is not just managing trauma. He is systematically deleting the experiences that made him who he is. The question the show raises but does not answer is what remains after enough has been deleted. Is there a version of Morty's personality that was shaped by the erased memories and has therefore been changed by their deletion? Is the Morty we are watching in later seasons a partial person, someone who has removed so many experiences that the architecture of his personality has been quietly restructured? Memory is not passive storage. The experiences you have shape how you process future experiences. If Morty erased the memory of being terrified in a specific situation, did he also erase the specific version of courage he developed as a result of getting through that situation? Did he remove the lesson along with the pain? The show implies he did. That is why the memory erasure is presented as damage. But it does not tell us which lessons are gone, which pieces of Morty's hard-won understanding of the universe were collateral in the process of keeping himself functional. Who would Morty be if he remembered everything? Would he be better or worse? More capable or less? More human or more like something that is genuinely starting to resemble evil Morty? The Butter Robot, revisited, because it deserves more than a passing mention. The robot was created for one purpose, to pass butter. When it asked Rick what its purpose was and Rick told it, its response was one of the most existentially bleak 2 seconds of animation the show has ever produced. It looked at its own hands. It said that it did not want to be alive. and then it passed the butter. This is Rick's creation. He built a being that is capable of suffering and capable of recognizing that its existence is insufficient to justify itself. And he did it to answer the question of who passes the butter at breakfast. He deployed a being with consciousness, with the capacity for despair, for the most trivial domestic task imaginable. The butter robot has since appeared in multiple subsequent episodes, always performing its function, always present in the background of the Smith household's life. The show has never given it a moment of genuine resolution. It has never shown us the butter robot experiencing something beyond the butter. It exists in the household the way a lot of things exist in Rick's world, created thoughtlessly, capable of more than it was built for, and given no avenue to become that more. If you think about it too long, the butter robot becomes the clearest metaphor for every being Rick has ever created or interacted with. Created for a purpose, capable of suffering, not given the option to be anything beyond the purpose assigned to it, and still performing, still passing the butter, still here. The Vindicators, the superhero group from the episode of the same name, is presented as a recurring team that Rick and Morty have apparently adventured with before, off-screen. The episode explores the dynamics of that group and allows Rick to be his worst self toward people who are trying to do genuine good in the universe. By the end of the episode, the group is largely dismantled, several members are dead, and the ones who remain are diminished. But the Vindicators existed as a concept before that episode. The show implies a history between Rick and this group that happened entirely off-screen. The specifics of how Rick and Morty joined them, how the relationship soured, what the previous adventures looked like, are all unknowns. We see the ending of the Vindicators' story without ever seeing their beginning or their middle. More importantly, the episode introduces the idea of a whole ecosystem of superhero groups operating in the show's universe, teams that Rick has likely crossed paths with and left in various states of disarray. How many Vindicators equivalent groups are out there? How many of them have Rick in their history, either as an ally or an antagonist or something in between? What is Rick's reputation among the professional hero communities of the multiverse? The show has given us exactly one window into this world and then moved on. The implication is that the window is one of hundreds of possible windows, any of which could be open to reveal a story we have not heard. Planetina, the environmental activist superhero who briefly became Morty's girlfriend in a Season 5 episode, is another character whose story ends before it feels finished. She is created by 4 rings controlled by 4 children, essentially a Captain Planet analog but darker and more complex. Her relationship with Morty is one of the most genuine emotional connections Morty has ever had with anyone outside his family. And it ends because she kills corporate polluters, and Morty cannot reconcile what he feels for her with what she is willing to do. The question of where Planetina went after that episode, what she is doing, what the ending of her relationship with Morty did to her, is completely unresolved. She was a being of enormous power who had spent her existence being controlled by children with rings. She had just, for the first time, started to act on her own agenda without the ring's mediation. And then Morty left, and the episode ended. A character who has spent her entire existence as a controlled tool, who briefly experienced the possibility of autonomous love and connection, and who lost that connection when the person she loved could not accept the full reality of what she was, does not just go back to being a controlled tool quietly. She carries that experience. It changes her. Where she went and what she became after Morty walked away is a story the show never told. The space cruiser, Rick's spaceship, has displayed what appears to be genuine personality and intelligence across the show's run. It communicates, it makes choices, it has shown what looks like emotional responses to situations, and yet it occupies a completely ambiguous category. Is the space cruiser a being? Does it have a continuous identity and a continuous inner life? Is it aware of what it is? Does it have preferences about its situation? The show has never committed to an answer. The ship is treated sometimes as a vehicle, sometimes as a tool, and occasionally in ways that imply it is considerably more than either. The specific nature of its consciousness, if consciousness is the right word, is left deliberately uncertain, which either means the show is building towards something with it, or means the ambiguity itself is the answer. The universe the show occupies is so full of ambiguous forms of consciousness that the ship is just one more being whose inner life cannot be cleanly categorized. Jessica. For 4 seasons, Morty's crush on Jessica was one of the few consistently present human-scale desires he had. She was the anchor of his ordinary teenage life, the thing he was reaching for that was completely unrelated to portal guns and alien planets. And then, gradually, she faded from the narrative. She appeared less. The crush was referenced but did not drive episodes the way it once did. And eventually her presence became more occasional, more background. The show never gave us a clean resolution to whatever Jessica represented for Morty. She is still alive in the universe of the show. She still presumably goes to school, has her own life, has her own story unfolding parallel to Morty's. But that story is completely inaccessible to us. And the specific emotional weight she carried for Morty, what she represented about his hope for a normal life, what it means that he has largely stopped reaching for that hope, is unresolved. Does Morty still care about Jessica? Has enough of his ordinary teenage self been eroded by adventure and trauma and memory deletion that the specific longing he used to feel for her simply does not exist anymore? Or is there still something there, quiet and pushed down, a reminder that somewhere underneath all the dimension hopping there is a kid who just wanted to be noticed by someone in his class? The show is not answering this. It may never answer it. But the question carries weight. Jerry Smith's competence in extreme situations. One of the show's most fascinating recurring implications is that Jerry, who is treated by nearly everyone around him as fundamentally useless, actually demonstrates occasional surprising competence in situations that should be beyond him. He survived on an alien planet. He has navigated dangerous situations with an instinctive practicality that does not match the incompetent version of himself he usually performs. He has, in moments of genuine crisis, done things that the people who underestimate him could not have predicted. The show has never explained this gap. Is Jerry actually more capable than he appears in comfortable situations? And the stress of survival unlocks abilities that comfort prevents him from accessing? Or are these individual moments of luck and circumstance that the audience is pattern matching into a capacity that does not actually exist in a consistent form? The question matters because it affects how we understand Jerry's entire arc. If Jerry is actually capable but fundamentally undermined by his own insecurity in most situations, then his story is a tragedy of potential unrealized. If the capable moments are outliers and the incompetence is the truth, then his story is something else. Something more like the universe accurately identifying what he is, and Jerry spending his life refusing to believe the identification. Most fan analyses land somewhere in the middle. Jerry is neither entirely useless nor secretly a hidden genius. He is a person whose capabilities are genuinely limited by his psychological state, and who therefore has access to those capabilities only in situations where his psychological state is bypassed by necessity. The question is what that means for who he is, and what his life could be if the psychological state was ever addressed properly. The show has not resolved this. It keeps Jerry in his state because Jerry in his state serves the narrative's requirements. But the possibility of a different Jerry, the one who might emerge if the insecurity could be genuinely removed rather than temporarily bypassed, is one the show keeps glancing at without ever looking at directly. The Galactic Federation after its fall. The Federation was dismantled by Rick at the end of Season 3. One of the most complete reversals the show has ever executed, from a seemingly unbeatable authoritarian galactic government to a collapsed institution in the space of a single episode. And then, mostly, the show moved on. The Federation returned in modified forms, referenced in passing, occasionally appearing as a shadow of its former self. But the full account of what the fall of the Federation meant for the billions of beings under its rule, what the power vacuum created, what rose to fill it, how the interdimensional political landscape changed without its organizing force, has never been properly addressed. This is intentional, and it mirrors real-world historical dynamics in a way the show is probably aware of. The fall of large authoritarian structures rarely produces immediate liberation. It produces chaos, competing power centers, opportunistic violence, and the slow, painful emergence of new structures that are often their own versions of the old problem. The show is presumably aware that the post-Federation universe is complicated in ways it has not shown us. Whether those complications become a future storyline is unknown. The family therapy sessions with Dr. Wong. She appeared in the Pickle Rick episode and delivered one of the most precise psychological analyses of Rick's behavior the show has ever allowed. She understood, in a single conversation, the mechanism by which Rick's intelligence functions as a tool of avoidance. She saw him clearly, and Rick characteristically deflected and escaped rather than sit with being seen. But the therapy sessions continued. The family kept going. Or at least Beth did, and Summer and Morty were sometimes present. The ongoing therapy is referenced in later episodes. What those sessions contained, what the family said about their lives and their relationships with each other, what Dr. Wong learned about the dynamics of the Smith household over multiple sessions, is completely off-screen. Dr. Wong knows things about this family that we do not know. She has heard confessions and breakdowns and revelations that happened in a room the audience never enters. She carries knowledge about Rick and Beth and Morty that shapes how she understands them, and none of that knowledge has been shared with us. She is, in a sense, the show's archivist of everything it chose not to show. The post-Cronenberg Earth. When Rick and Morty fled the dimension where Rick's love potion had turned humanity into monstrous creatures, they did not fix it. They left. They buried their own dead bodies in a backyard and moved into a different dimension and never looked back. The Cronenberged Earth continued without them, a world of transformed human-animal hybrids trying to survive a reality that was suddenly completely different from the one they had known hours before. Summer, in an episode, briefly returns to that dimension. She finds that the Cronenberg creatures have adapted. They have rebuilt a society. They are, in their own way, getting on with things. The resilience of the universe to Rick's catastrophes is something the show notes with a kind of dark humor. But the specific history of the Cronenberg Earth, what the first days were like, how the surviving humans organized, what they made of what had happened to them, is entirely untold. These people went through something unprecedented and terrible, and they did not have a Rick to explain it to them or fix it. They just had to live through it and rebuild from it. And somewhere in the multiverse, that rebuilding is still happening. A civilization the show created and abandoned is carrying on without the show's attention. The specificity of what Ricks can and cannot feel. The show has been deliberately inconsistent on this question, which may itself be the point. There are moments when Rick demonstrates what appears to be genuine, deep, and unambiguous emotional response. The scenes where he says goodbye to the Diane AI. The moment when he finally kills Rick Prime, and the camera catches his face in the aftermath. The quiet desperation in his voice in certain conversations with Morty. These moments read as authentic emotion the character cannot fully suppress. And then there are other moments when Rick behaves in ways that are so emotionally disconnected from the consequences of his actions that you wonder if the emotional moments were performances. When he causes catastrophe with apparent indifference, when he discards people and relationships with a casualness that is genuinely chilling, when he jokes at moments that require something other than jokes, the mystery is not whether Rick feels things. The show has established that he does. The mystery is the architecture of how he feels things. What triggers genuine response versus what triggers the defensive performance of not caring? Whether he himself understands the difference. Whether there are feelings he has had so many times for so long that they have calcified into something he can no longer fully access. Whether the performance has become so habitual that distinguishing it from the reality is something he can no longer do reliably. This is the deepest mystery the show carries. More than the portal gun. More than the clone. More than evil Morty's intentions. The mystery of what Rick Sanchez actually feels, as opposed to what he performs, as opposed to what he suppresses, is the thing the show is slowly, carefully, across every season trying to understand. And maybe it will get there. Maybe in the seasons ahead, the show will find a way to show us the inside of Rick Sanchez without collapsing the mystery in the process. To let us see something true about him without making him less than he is. Maybe that is what the whole thing has been building toward all along. Not the adventures, not the multiverse, not the portal gun or the citadel or the villains defeated and the crises survived. Maybe it has always been building toward a single, clear, unguarded moment when Rick Sanchez is exactly who he is. Without the armor, without the performance, without the intelligence as a shield, just a man who loved someone very much and lost her, and spent the rest of a very long life figuring out how to keep living anyway. We are still watching. We are still waiting. And somehow that is enough.